A poor boy unexpectedly saves the life of an injured millionaire woman who has drifted ashore. But a few days later, the boy suddenly regrets saving the woman because the late afternoon sun spilled gold across the waters of Frenchman Bay, casting long, shimmering streaks that danced with the waves. The gulls circled above, their cries sharp and scattered against the endless blue sky. On the sand, Ryan Callahan, barefoot and wild-haired, led a charge through the dunes, a wooden stick in his hand as if it were the mighty sword of a legendary pirate. "Over here!" he called, kicking up sand as he sprinted ahead of the pack, his friends laughing and tumbling behind him. "The treasure's got to be near the driftwood." The treasure was nothing more than bits of sea glass, old bottle caps, and the occasional smooth rock that could pass as pirate gold, but to a 7-year-old it was as thrilling as discovering a sunken ship. The hunt had gone on for nearly an hour now, the tide creeping closer, but Ryan wasn't ready to stop. Not yet. Then, something pulled his gaze away from the game. At first, it looked like another piece of wreckage washed ashore, tangled in seaweed and half buried beneath the shifting sand. But as he squinted against the glare of the sun, his stomach twisted with unease. It wasn't driftwood. It wasn't an old fishing net. It was a person. Ryan froze. His pulse pounded against his ribs. The other kids kept running, laughing, oblivious, but Ryan took a step forward, then another, his breath shallow. The figure didn't move. He swallowed hard. "Hello." His voice barely carried over the sound of the waves. The wind tugged at his t-shirt, making his small frame shiver, but he didn't turn away. The woman lay slumped against the jagged rocks, her body half soaked, half covered in sand, like she had been spat out by the sea. Her clothes clung to her, dark with water and torn in places. Bruises, ugly and purple, marred her pale skin. Her arms lay slack by her sides. Her fingers curled slightly into the sand, as if she had tried to hold on to something. Ryan took another step. His throat felt tight. She wasn't dead, was she? He edged closer, the salty wind stinging his eyes, then crouched beside her, his small hands hovering just above her shoulder. He hesitated, then gently touched the damp fabric of her sleeve. Nothing. His chest constricted. He jerked back to his feet and ran. The bell over Gerald Callahan's shop jangled violently as Ryan shoved the door open, breathless. Inside, the scent of sea salt and worn leather mingled with the woodsy aroma of Gerald's pipe. The old man sat behind the counter, polishing a brass compass, his expression one of mild amusement until he saw Ryan's face. "What in God's name?" Gerald barely had time to set the compass down before Ryan grabbed his wrist, his small fingers trembling. "There's a lady," Ryan gasped. "By the rocks. She's not moving." Gerald's brows pulled together. "Did you check if she was breathing?" Ryan shook his head hard. "She's all beat up, Grandpa. She looks bad." Gerald didn't hesitate. In one swift motion, he grabbed his coat off the hook, his heavy boots already clomping toward the door. Ryan scrambled after him, his heart still hammering. The sand, once warm and familiar beneath his feet, now felt endless, stretching between him and the woman like a vast, uncertain chasm. When they reached the rocks, Gerald crouched beside her, his old knees creaking as he leaned in close. He placed 2 fingers against the side of her neck, silent, his weathered face unreadable. Ryan stood a few feet away, arms wrapped around himself. After what felt like an eternity, Gerald exhaled. "She's alive." Ryan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "But she won't last long if we leave her here." Gerald's voice was firm but low, his hands already moving, carefully lifting the woman's limp frame from the damp ground. She made no sound, no resistance, just dead weight against his broad chest. Ryan instinctively reached out, hesitating before gently wrapping his fingers around her cold, trembling hand. "Will she be okay?" he asked, his voice smaller than before. Gerald glanced down at him as they started walking. "I don't know, kid." Ryan didn't like that answer. The shop's back room smelled like warm cedar and salt, a stark contrast to the sharp chill that had clung to the woman's clothes. Gerald set her down carefully on the old overstuffed couch, muttering under his breath as he reached for a blanket. The fire in the wood stove crackled softly, filling the room with much-needed warmth. Ryan stood beside him, shifting from foot to foot. "She's real pale," he whispered. Gerald, now kneeling by the couch, pressed the back of his hand against her forehead, frowning. "She's ice cold. She's probably been out there for hours." Ryan bit his lip, his fingers gripping the hem of his shirt. He didn't know why, but something about her made him feel responsible. "I don't think she just fell," he said, the thought coming out before he could stop it. "She looks like somebody hurt her." Gerald paused. His eyes, the color of deep, stormy water, met Ryan's. For the first time, the boy saw something other than his usual quiet, steady demeanor. He saw worry. Gerald reached for the old rotary phone on the wall. "I'm calling Harold." Ryan nodded, stepping closer to the couch. He could hear the faint sound of her breathing now, uneven, shallow, but there. She was alive. But for how long? He wasn't sure if it was the fire's glow or something else, but in that moment, Ryan made a silent promise. He wouldn't let her disappear. Not like this. Not if he could help it. The night settled over Bar Harbor with a quiet that only small towns knew, a silence woven with the distant hush of waves and the occasional creak of wooden houses bracing against the wind. Inside Gerald Callahan's cabin, the warmth of the crackling fire softened the chill that had followed them in from the beach. The woman lay motionless on the worn leather couch, wrapped in an old wool blanket that smelled of salt, cedar, and thyme. Gerald sat on the edge of a wooden chair near the fireplace, fingers tapping idly against his knee. The minutes stretched long between the steady tick of the clock and the muffled sounds of the town beyond the fogged-up windows. Harold had arrived minutes ago, his leather medical bag resting beside him as he worked in quiet efficiency, his brow furrowed in deep thought. Ryan, usually full of questions, sat cross-legged on the floor, his chin resting on his hands. His usual restlessness had melted into something else, something quiet, something uncertain. "Well?" Gerald finally broke the silence, his voice rough but not unkind. "She's been out there for a while," Harold murmured, pressing two fingers lightly against the side of her throat. His gaze flicked up to Gerald's. "Her pulse is weak, but it's there." Ryan swallowed hard, his small voice breaking the hush. "Is she going to die?" Harold exhaled, slow and measured. He was used to treating cuts from fishing hooks, broken fingers from bar fights, and the occasional pneumonia from stubborn old sailors who refused to wear coats. This felt different. He pulled the blanket higher over her shoulders, brushing damp strands of hair from her forehead. "She's cold, dehydrated. Looks like she took a beating before the water got to her." His voice dropped, but Ryan still caught it. "Not an accident." The weight of that statement settled heavily in the room. Gerald let out a quiet sigh and sank into the worn armchair across from the couch, rubbing a calloused hand over his face. "I figured as much." Ryan glanced between them, sensing the unspoken. Not an accident meant someone had done this to her. Someone had left her there. Someone had wanted her to drown. He didn't like that thought. The woman, Harold had called her after she stirred briefly, though she hadn't said anything else, was still as a shadow now, her breathing shallow but steady. Ryan scooted a little closer, peering at the dark bruises blooming along her cheekbone and the angry scrapes across her arms. "She kind of looks like she got in a fight," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "A bad one." Harold reached for the small tin of salve he'd brought, the lid clicking softly as he opened it. "She put up one, I'd bet." Ryan bit his lip, watching as the doctor dabbed the ointment along a jagged cut near her temple. The firelight made it shine, like wet paint on a broken canvas. "She's going to wake up, right?" Harold hesitated for just a second. She's got a good chance. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. The night stretched long. Harold left after a while, promising to check in again the next morning. Gerald, after making sure Ashley was settled, retreated to his room. But Ryan couldn't sleep. He sat cross-legged on the floor, chin resting in his hands, watching the woman on the couch like he was waiting for a story to finish telling itself. The fire burned lower, the shadows stretching deeper. Every so often she twitched, a furrow in her brow, a faint movement of her lips. Ryan found himself holding his breath each time, hoping, but she never woke. He considered talking to her. People in books did that sometimes. Talked to sleeping folks like their words might tug them back to the surface. But what would he even say? The thought made his stomach feel strange, like the time he'd accidentally swallowed seawater. Instead, he pulled the blanket up, just a little higher over her shoulders. She looked small like this, curled up in layers too big for her frame, lost in whatever dreams came after nearly drowning. Ryan didn't realize he'd fallen asleep beside the couch until the shift in the air woke him. A sound, soft, barely there. He blinked blearily, the fire now just smoldering embers. The room was mostly dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the coals and the silvery slant of moonlight slipping through the window. And then, a whisper of movement. Ryan sat up fast, his heart thudding. Ashley's brow pinched like she was in pain, her fingers twitching slightly against the blanket. A small sound, a sigh, a broken breath, escaped her lips. For the first time, she wasn't completely still. Ryan hesitated, then leaned in just a little closer. Her eyelids fluttered. She didn't open them, not fully, but her expression shifted, the tension in her face tightening before it softened again. Her breathing, too, changed, less fragile now, more real. Ryan let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He wasn't sure if she could hear him, but he whispered anyway. "Hey," he said, as quiet as the ocean before dawn. She didn't answer, but she stirred just slightly, and Ryan let himself believe that meant something. The scent of coffee and toasted bread filled the cabin, wrapping the small space in warmth despite the cold morning mist curling around the windows. The fire had burned low, only faint embers glowing in the hearth, casting soft flickers across the wooden walls. Gerald moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, pouring 2 cups of coffee, one strong and black for himself, the other left untouched on the counter, an old habit from when his late wife was still around. The radio hummed quietly in the background, the voices of morning broadcasters discussing the tides and incoming weather shifts. At the table, Ryan sat hunched over a plate of toast, stabbing at it absent-mindedly with his fork. The edges were burnt, the way he always made them, when Gerald let him use the toaster unsupervised. He didn't seem to notice, too distracted by the occasional glance toward the couch, where the woman lay exactly as she had the night before, still, wrapped in blankets, a stranger adrift in a borrowed world. Gerald sipped his coffee, following the boy's gaze. "Eat your breakfast," he muttered. Ryan sighed, but took a bite. The morning was quiet, aside from the occasional crackle of wood shifting in the fire and the rhythmic clinking of Gerald's spoon against his cup. And then, a sound. Software barely there. A groan. Ryan's fork clattered against the plate as he sat up straighter. Gerald had already moved from his chair, crossing the room with slow, measured steps. On the couch, the woman stirred, her brow pinched as though something pulled at her from the edges of a bad dream. Her fingers twitched beneath the thick blanket, knuckles tightening, loosening. Then, with a sharp inhale, she opened her eyes. For a second, she didn't move, just stared at the ceiling, her expression blank with the heavy fog of someone who had been gone too long. Her breath hitched, her chest rising and falling unevenly. Then her gaze shifted, snapping to the unfamiliar room around her. And suddenly, she moved too fast. A sharp gasp, a half-formed cry, her body jerking upright before she could stop herself. She nearly toppled off the couch, her elbows slipping against the blanket, her hands grasping at air. "Easy," Gerald said, his voice steady but firm. The woman whipped toward him, her breaths ragged, her wild glassy eyes darting from him to Ryan, to the crackling fire. Ryan stayed frozen near the kitchen, watching her the way one might watch a trapped animal, wide-eyed, unmoving. "Where?" Her voice broke like a snapped thread, raw and scraped thin. She swallowed hard, blinking fast. "Where am I?" Gerald crouched beside the couch, not reaching for her, not moving too close. "Bar Harbor," he answered. "You washed up yesterday. My grandson found you by the rocks." She didn't respond right away. Her gaze flicked toward Ryan, as if trying to make sense of the small boy staring at her with cautious fascination. Then, her expression changed. The tension in her face deepened, brows knitting, her throat bobbing. Her fingers clutched the blanket, curling into the thick fabric as something unseen pressed against her ribs, against her memory. Gerald noticed the way her shoulders shook slightly, the way her breath had gone uneven again. And before she could panic further, Harold's voice cut through the space. "You're safe now." The doctor stood near the doorway, having let himself in moments before. His coat smelled faintly of salt air and antiseptic, and when he stepped forward, his movements were unhurried, calm. The woman's eyes darted to him, then back to Gerald, as if waiting for one of them to tell her something she could hold on to. "Safe," she repeated, but the word felt foreign on her tongue. Harold set his bag down on the table, rolling up his sleeves as he approached. "I need to check you over, if that's all right. You took quite a beating." She didn't nod, didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. Gerald watched as Harold carefully pressed 2 fingers against her wrist, checking her pulse, then gently lifted her chin, turning her face toward the dim morning light filtering through the window. The bruises looked worse in daylight, deep, purple shadows blooming along her jaw, dark crescents beneath her eyes. She flinched when Harold's hand brushed the raw scrapes on her arm. "Sorry," he murmured. "I know it hurts." She blinked rapidly, swallowing hard against the tremor in her breath. Her gaze dropped to her lap, where her fingers gripped the edge of the blanket, as though it were the only thing keeping her anchored. Ryan took a hesitant step closer. "Do you remember anything?" he asked, voice softer than before. Gerald glanced at the boy but didn't stop him. The woman didn't answer right away. Her expression flickered, uncertainty, then hesitation, then something else, something that hollowed out her eyes. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her fingers twitched against the fabric, and then, barely above a whisper, like a name pulled from deep water. "Ashley." Ryan blinked. Gerald's fingers tightened slightly around the arm of the chair. Harold nodded, his expression unreadable. "Ashley," he repeated. "That's your name." She gave the smallest of nods. Her throat worked around the next words, as if they were sharp-edged, as if speaking them aloud made them too real. "My name is Ashley Hughes." Ryan exhaled, shoulders slumping slightly, as though some invisible tension had left his small frame. He edged a little closer, peering up at her. Ashley dragged a hand through her hair, pressing her fingers against her temple as her breath hitched again. "I was in the water," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Her eyebrows pinched together. I remember the waves." Gerald watched her carefully, his sharp eyes not missing the way her hands trembled. Ashley's fingers clenched in the blanket. Her voice dropped, barely more than a breath. "I was supposed to die there." The room fell into stillness. Ryan moved before he thought about it, before Gerald could stop him. His small hand reached for her sleeve, giving the faintest tug, like a child trying to ground an adult back to the present. "You didn't," he said simply. Ashley's breath shuddered in her chest. She stared at him, at the small boy who looked at her not with fear, but with something else. Something steady, something true. She didn't have words for it, but for the first time since waking, she let herself breathe. The morning had settled into a gentle rhythm, the radio murmuring softly from the kitchen, the smell of butter and toast hanging in the air, the occasional clink of Gerald's coffee spoon against his mug. The fireplace had been stoked back to life, its warmth curling against the cold air, slipping through the cracks in the window panes. Ashley sat at the worn wooden table, a steaming cup of tea wrapped between her fingers, her hands still unsteady. The heat seeped into her palms, but she still felt cold. Cold in a way that had nothing to do with the ocean. Gerald sat across from her, quiet but attentive, his brows furrowed as he watched her over the rim of his coffee mug. Harold leaned against the counter, arms folded, his usual clinical detachment softened by something more thoughtful. And then there was Ryan, perched on a chair that was just a little too big for him, his plate of half-eaten toast forgotten, as he stared at Ashley with the wide-eyed patience of someone waiting for the ending of a story. Ashley swallowed, setting her cup down with slow precision. "You don't have to talk about it yet," Gerald said, voice even. She shook her head. She had to. Her breath felt tight in her chest. "It was supposed to be a good day," she started, her voice raw and uneven, like the words were dragging themselves out of her throat against her will. "A family trip. My father had planned it for weeks. A day at sea, a chance to get away from everything. But—" She hesitated, fingers tightening around the edge of the table. The room fell into a stillness, save for the fire crackling in the hearth. But Betty went missing. Gerald and Harold exchanged a glance, but neither interrupted. Ashley's hands curled into fists, her nails pressing into her palms. She was on a smaller boat. We all assumed she'd gone exploring, but as the hours passed, no one could find her. My father was starting to panic. She swallowed, her throat dry. I went to look for her. Her breath hitched slightly, but she forced herself to keep going. I took one of the lifeboats. It wasn't far. I spotted her near the cove. Ashley's eyes darkened, distant, as though she were watching the memory unfold in the fire's glow. I should have been relieved. But she wasn't alone. She blinked, and something sharp and painful flickered across her face. She was with Dylan. Harold exhaled through his nose, as if the name alone told him everything he needed to know. Gerald's grip on his mug tightened slightly, his knuckles whitening. Ashley shook her head, laughing bitterly. My parents had warned her. He was trouble, a liar, a manipulator, and she just smiled like none of it mattered. Her breath shuddered. I confronted her, told her she was reckless, that she was being stupid, that she had no idea what she was getting herself into. Ashley's voice shook, but her expression hardened. She got angry, said I was just like my father, controlling, judgmental. Ryan, who had been silent this whole time, suddenly piped up. But she's your sister, he said, frowning in confusion. Ashley flinched. It was the way he said it, so simple, so obvious. She forced a breath, blinking against the sting behind her eyes. Yeah, she said, voice hollow. She is. Ryan's frown deepened, his small hands pressing against the table as he tried to make sense of something that, to him, shouldn't make sense at all. Ashley looked away. I don't know what changed, she admitted. One moment we were fighting, and the next, Dylan was there, grabbing me, holding me back. Her fingers curled against the fabric of her sleeves. I didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. I only had one life jacket on me, and one for Betty. I didn't know Dylan was there. Gerald's jaw tensed. They took my life jacket, she whispered. Betty, my own sister, ripped it off me to give to her boyfriend. The weight of those words sank into the room. Ryan stopped moving. Even the fire seemed to burn quieter. She wears the remaining one. Ashley exhaled shakily. Dylan told her to keep it. Said they didn't need me to come back. The silence in the cabin felt like it might crack open at any second. Gerald's grip on his mug was so tight, it was a wonder it hadn't shattered. Harold's face was unreadable, but there was a slight shift in his posture, a tension in his shoulders, a quiet fury in the set of his jaw. Ryan just looked stunned. "She left me there," Ashley continued, voice quieter now, almost detached. "Dylan pushed the boat away, and they just swam back." She stared down at her hands. "I tried to keep my head above water, but the tide was too strong, and when I couldn't fight it anymore, I just—" Her voice caught. The fire crackled. Gerald, for the first time in a long time, had no words. Ryan, after a long silence, finally asked, so softly it barely carried across the table, "But why?" Ashley let out a hollow laugh. "Because I was in the way. Because they knew I'd tell my father what I saw. Because Betty chose him." Ryan shook his head, his small face twisting with something that looked dangerously close to anger. "That's dumb," he muttered. "She's dumb." "A lot of people do dumb things," Gerald said quietly. "Doesn't make them any less cruel." Ashley closed her eyes. For the first time since waking up, the weight of it all truly settled in her chest. She was meant to die that night. If it hadn't been for the current pushing her toward Bar Harbor, if Ryan hadn't found her, she would have. Harold cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence. "You need rest," he said gently, his usual sharpness softened with something almost like understanding. "You've been through hell, and you're still healing. You need time." Ashley opened her mouth to argue, but Gerald shot her a look, the kind that left no room for debate. "No one's rushing you out the door," he said. "Take the time you need." Ashley exhaled. The truth was, she was too tired to fight. She gave the smallest nod. Ryan, still frowning, pushed his plate forward slightly, his way of offering something without saying it outright. Ashley hesitated, then picked up a slice of toast. She didn't eat much, but she ate, and for now, that was enough. The first few days after Ashley's confession passed, like the slow rolling tide, neither entirely still nor entirely restless, just shifting, adjusting, finding its place. The house, which had once felt too silent in her presence, gradually returned to its usual rhythm. Gerald went about his mornings the way he always had, coffee black, radio low, the occasional grunt at the news headlines. Ryan, unburdened by adult hesitation, went back to treating her less like a fragile thing and more like a curious new addition to his world. Ashley, for her part, found herself falling into their pace, if only because it was easier than thinking about anything else. She started helping out around the shop on the fourth morning, though Gerald hadn't asked. The place smelled of sea salt, sun-bleached wood, and the faint trace of fishing rope. The shelves were stacked with everything from snorkels and dive knives to waterproof maps and sun-faded postcards that no one ever bought, but still somehow remained. "Didn't peg you for a worker," Gerald muttered, watching her sort through a pile of tangled fishing nets. Ashley shot him a look. "Didn't peg you for a guy who lets his shop get this messy." Gerald let out a sound that was almost a chuckle before retreating behind the counter. She didn't mind the work. She liked keeping her hands busy. There was something grounding about it, the scratch of rope between her fingers, the weight of an anchor in her hands, the way the air carried the faint scent of the sea even through the open door. Ryan, of course, was less interested in work and more interested in figuring out how far he could push her before she got annoyed. "You know, if you really want to help, you should probably know what half this stuff is for," he said one afternoon, arms crossed, chin tilted up in a manner that made him look far too much like Gerald. Ashley raised a brow. "And let me guess, You're the expert. Ryan nodded solemnly. Obviously. The next 20 minutes consisted of Ryan parading her around the shop, quizzing her on everything from life vests to spear fishing gear. When she got one wrong, he would dramatically sigh and shake his head like a disappointed professor. You're really not great at this, he mused, after she failed to guess the function of a fish stringer. Ashley crossed her arms. And what, you are? Ryan grinned, his face mischievous. I've been living here forever. You just got here. That makes me smarter. Ashley rolled her eyes, but for the first time in weeks, she felt something close to amusement tug at her ribs. Harold visited the shop more often than necessary, though he never admitted it. He'd come in under the pretense of checking Ashley's stitches, or restocking the first aid kit, or, once, hilariously, inspecting the fire extinguisher, despite the fact that Gerald had owned it for years and never once cared to have it checked. Ashley saw through it immediately. You realize you're a terrible liar, right? She told him one afternoon, arms folded as she leaned against the counter. Harold, utterly unfazed, simply scribbled something in his notebook. And yet, you're still letting me check your pulse. Ashley narrowed her eyes, but didn't pull her wrist away. Ryan, always one to sniff out unspoken things, had apparently decided that whatever this was between Ashley and Harold, needed to be acknowledged, and in true Ryan fashion, he chose the most inopportune moment possible to do it. Let us know which city in the world our lovely audience is from in a comment below. It happened at dinner. The three of them were seated at the worn wooden table, the air warm from the kitchen stove, the scent of buttered potatoes and freshly baked bread thick in the air. Gerald had just taken a sip of his soup, when Ryan, with all the subtlety of a cannon blast, declared, "You guys should just get married already." The silence that followed was instant and deafening. Gerald choked, full-on choked. His spoon clattered against the bowl, and he slammed a fist against his chest, coughing violently. Harold, mid-drink, sputtered into his glass of water, setting it down with a thud as he wiped his mouth. Ashley, caught so completely off guard, let out an actual startled laugh, the first real one she'd had in weeks. Ryan, completely unfazed by the chaos he had just unleashed, simply picked up his fork and continued eating. Gerald, still red-faced and wheezing, turned to glare at the boy. "Where the hell did you get that idea?" Ryan shrugged. "You're old. Harold's old. She's kinda old." "Hey!" Ashley interjected. "So, it makes sense," Ryan continued, as if his logic was the most obvious thing in the world. Harold, recovering from his near-death experience, rubbed his temples. "Ryan, that is not how marriage works." "Well," Ryan said thoughtfully, chewing, "maybe it should be." Ashley shook her head, grinning despite herself. The laughter, the sheer ridiculousness of the moment, made something shift in her chest, something that felt warm and real and strangely comforting. She wasn't okay, not yet, but maybe, just maybe, she would be. The days passed in a rhythm as steady as the tide, soft mornings laced with coffee and salt air, afternoons spent in the shop untangling fishing nets, evenings warmed by the fire's glow. For the first time in what felt like years, Ashley was untethered from expectation, from obligation, from the weight of a name that had long since stopped feeling like her own. She liked Bar Harbor in the way one likes something familiar before realizing it has become something more. The people greeted her with easy kindness, their smiles uncomplicated, their questions limited to the weather or what bait was best for striped bass. No one asked about Boston, about Betty, about the cold betrayal she carried in her chest, like a stone she could not set down. Ryan, never one for silence, had taken it upon himself to integrate her into small-town life. His lessons were less about the town itself and more about the specific things he believed she should know. "This," he declared one afternoon, leading her to a dock lined with lobster traps, "is the best place to sit when you're mad. You can kick the water and not get in trouble. Ashley squinted at him. That's oddly specific. Ryan shrugged. I get mad sometimes. Ashley thought of Betty, of Dylan, of the way the ocean had pulled her under without a second thought. Yeah, she murmured. Me too. One evening, the wind carried the scent of an incoming storm, thick and heavy over the harbour. The shop had already closed for the night, the windows shut against the growing chill. Ashley was perched on the arm of the couch, flipping absently through one of Gerald's old fishing magazines, when the door slammed open so hard it rattled the walls. Ryan barreled in, breathless, his face flushed from the cold, and something sharper, something urgent. He clutched Gerald's old battered television remote like a trophy. You're on TV! The words didn't sink in at first. Ashley blinked, flipping the magazine shut. What? Ryan jabbed a finger toward the small, dust-covered television that hadn't been turned on in years. The news, your family. Just turn it on. Harold and Gerald, who had been mid-conversation at the kitchen table, both stood as Ashley's stomach lurched, a sudden cold unease creeping up her spine. Gerald wordlessly took the remote and pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life, static buzzing before the picture sharpened into something far more surreal. A news anchor sat at a polished desk, her voice smooth and practiced. Behind her, a photo of Ashley filled the screen, not the way she was now, but the way she had been before everything unraveled. Polished, composed, a woman who had never been left to drown. Ashley Hughes, daughter of prominent Boston businessman Thomas Hughes, was tragically lost at sea. Ashley's breath stalled in her throat. The scene shifted. A press conference. Her father stood behind a podium, flanked by Betty and her mother, Donna. The crowd was somber, microphones clustered in tight, cameras flashing in calculated grief. Her father's face was drawn, his grief worn like a suit tailored just for him. We have suffered an unimaginable loss, he said, voice even, measured. Ashley was a bright light in our lives. There is no replacing her. Ashley's fingers curled into the fabric of her sleeve. The image cut to Betty, crying into Donna's shoulder. A reporter spoke over the footage. According to sources, Ashley's younger sister, Betty Hughes, was with her at the time of the accident, but was unable to prevent the tragedy. Ashley's stomach twisted. Unable to prevent the tragedy? But it was the next part, the next name, that made her feel like the ground had tilted beneath her. Her boyfriend, Dylan Carter, bravely rescued Betty, but was unfortunately unable to reach Ashley in time. The screen filled with footage of Dylan, standing solemnly beside Betty, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. His expression was carefully arranged, a mask of grief, of regret. Ashley's vision blurred at the edges. They were being hailed as heroes for leaving her to die. The fire crackled behind her, but Ashley barely heard it over the roar in her ears, the sudden, suffocating press of anger. Gerald exhaled sharply, his hands pressing flat against the table. Harold crossed his arms, his expression unreadable, but there was something dark in his gaze. Ashley didn't say a word. She simply stared at the screen, at the people who had taken everything from her, at the twisted, fabricated reality they had spun in her absence. She could feel the tension winding tighter, like a bowstring drawn too far. Enough. Ashley stood, her fists clenched, her breath steady, in a way that felt dangerous. Harold watched her carefully. Ashley. She met his gaze, her voice quiet but sharp as a blade. I'm going back. The silence in Gerald's cabin stretched long after Ashley had spoken. The storm outside had yet to break, but she could feel it in her bones, an impending shift, the weight of something inevitable. Gerald was the first to speak, setting his coffee mug down with a deliberate heaviness. You're not just walking in there empty-handed, he said. Not a question, but a statement. Ashley met his gaze, her fingers tightening against the wood of the table. No. Gerald exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his jaw. Then you better start thinking about what you need. The next morning, Harold arrived earlier than usual, his medical bag slung over one shoulder. He didn't need to ask why she'd asked him to come. Ashley sat stiffly on a chair by the fireplace, her sleeves pushed up to reveal the dark bruises that still lingered on her arms. Harold kneeled in front of her, his hands gentle but clinical as he examined her injuries. "You're healing," he said after a long pause, though his brow furrowed as he pressed lightly against a rib that still felt sore. "But these bruises won't just disappear overnight, especially the deeper ones." "Good," Ashley said, and Harold looked up at her, eyes narrowing slightly. "I need pictures." Harold's fingers stilled. "Ashley, they need to see what happened to me." She swallowed hard, forcing the words through the knot in her throat. "The hospital will have medical records, but those can be twisted. I need something real, something undeniable." Harold exhaled through his nose, shaking his head slightly. "You realize what you're asking?" "I do," Ashley said steady, "and I need you to do it." Harold didn't answer right away. He just studied her long enough that the fire crackled behind them in the pause. Then, without another word, he reached for his bag. The camera clicked softly as he took the first picture. Ashley held still. After Harold left, Ashley found Ryan sitting at the counter, legs swinging back and forth, his usual energy subdued. "I want to help," he said, before she could say anything. Ashley hesitated. "Ryan, I saw you," he interrupted, brows furrowed. "That day on the beach, you looked—" He trailed off, his small hands clenching slightly. Ashley swallowed, unsure what to say. "I'll tell them," Ryan said fiercely. "I'll tell everyone what you looked like, how you didn't have an effing—" "Ryan," Gerald warned. "Life jacket," Ryan finished, a little quieter, but his eyes still blazed. "I'll tell them everything. I mean—" He sat up straighter, determined in the way only a 7-year-old could be. "I've never been in a courtroom before, but I bet I'd be great at it." Ashley felt something shift in her chest. She reached out, ruffling his hair lightly. "I believe that," she murmured. Gerald cleared his throat. "Well, I'm no lawyer, but I've got a good memory. If you need me to say what I saw, I will." Ashley nodded. She already knew Gerald would stand beside her. She wasn't alone in this. That night, she made the call. Claire picked up on the second ring. "Claire, it's me," Ashley quickly said. Claire's voice was groggy with sleep. "Whoever this is," Claire grumbled, "you better have a damn good reason for calling me at—" There was a pause, then a sharp inhale. "Ashley?" Ashley closed her eyes. "Yeah." Claire's breath came quick, sharp. "Holy, Ashley, where the hell are you?" You're supposed to be—" "I know." A pause. A shaky inhale. God, I thought I was losing my mind." Claire's voice was uneven now, faltering beneath the weight of everything left unsaid. "Ashley, I went to your funeral." Ashley's grip on the phone tightened. "Claire, listen to me. I need your help." Another breath, then steel in her voice. "Anything." "I need you to find footage from the yacht," Ashley said, voice clipped, focused. "Any cameras on board, anything that shows I was wearing a life jacket before I left to find Betty. Please do as I say. I will explain more later." Claire let out a quiet curse. "That's not going to be easy. Your father—" "Claire," Ashley said, forcing back the tremor in her throat. "I need this." A long silence. Then, "I'll get it." Ashley exhaled, pressing her free hand against her forehead. "And Claire?" "Yeah. Be careful." Claire scoffed lightly, but her voice was still thick. "That's my line, Hughes." The call ended. Ashley stared at the phone, the weight of everything settling over her. But this time, it didn't feel suffocating. It felt like resolve. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was fighting back. The drive back to Boston was long, stretching through the empty highways that ran parallel to the Atlantic. The ocean, a constant, unrelenting presence. Ashley stared out the window, watching the coastline blur past, her mind adrift in the same endless waves that had nearly swallowed her whole. She hadn't been back since before, since her sister's betrayal, since the world had declared her dead. And now, she was returning not as a ghost, but as a storm. The car rumbled steadily beneath them, the occasional bump in the road the only thing grounding her. She shifted in her seat, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Gerald, in the driver's seat, cast her a sideways glance. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice level. Ashley's fingers dug into her sleeves. "Yes, I do." Gerald let out a breath, adjusting his grip on the wheel. "Then you're not doing it alone." Ashley turned to look at him. He kept his eyes on the road, steady, unmoving, the same way he had been since the moment he found her on the rocks. A lump rose in her throat, but she swallowed it down. "I know." From the back seat, Ryan piped up, breaking the tension like only he could. "And I'm your personal bodyguard." Ashley glanced at him through the rearview mirror. He was sitting far too upright, chin tilted, chest puffed out, as if he were about to storm into battle with nothing but his sneakers and a 7-year-old's sense of justice. A laugh caught in her throat, the first real one in hours. "Yeah?" she said. "Think you're up for it?" Ryan grinned. "Obviously. I know karate." Gerald snorted. "No, you don't." "Well," Ryan amended, undeterred. "I watched a lot of kung fu movies. Same thing." Ashley shook her head, but the tension in her chest loosened, just a little. The closer they got to Boston, the more the city began to shift around them. Glass and steel replaced the low wooden buildings of Bar Harbor. The air smelled different here, less like salt and sun, more like pavement after rain. Ashley felt her breath shorten. She could see the Hughes estate in her mind before they even reached it. She had grown up in that house, a place too grand to be called home, a place where laughter had always felt like an echo rather than something real. And now she was returning not as a daughter, but as a stranger. Her father had already mourned her. Her sister had already erased her. What would they do when she walked through that door? Her fingers curled into her lap, nails pressing against her palm. Gerald, ever perceptive, reached across the center console and gave her knee a firm squeeze. Steady, reassuring. "Breathe, kid." Ashley let out a slow, shaky exhale. And then, they were there. The Hughes estate loomed ahead, a monstrous thing of stone and glass, standing cold against the city skyline. The iron gates gleamed under the streetlights, the driveway paved with a perfection that felt foreign after the uneven dirt roads of Bar Harbor. Ashley stared at it, her pulse a slow, pounding drumbeat in her ears. Gerald put the car in park, but didn't move to open the door. "You sure?" Ashley gritted her teeth. "No," she admitted. Then, before she could second-guess herself, she reached for the handle and pushed the door open. Ryan scrambled out after her, practically vibrating with energy. "Let's go take down some bad guys," he whispered. Ashley huffed out a small, incredulous laugh. "Ryan, this isn't a movie," Ryan shrugged. "It should be." Gerald fell into step beside her, a steady presence at her side. Harold was supposed to meet them later, after finishing up some last-minute work at the hospital, but even without him, Ashley didn't feel as alone as she expected. The three of them approached the gate. The security guard, a man in a crisp black uniform, straightened the moment he saw her. His eyes widened. "Miss Hughes?" Ashley lifted her chin. "Let me in." The man hesitated, his hand hovering over the intercom. I should call Mr. Hughes first." Ashley stepped forward. "I'm his daughter," she said, her voice calm, unyielding. "I don't need an invitation." The guard swallowed hard, but, after a beat, pressed a button. The gate groaned as it slowly swung open. Ashley walked forward, her heart beating harder with every step. Inside, the driveway stretched toward the grand entrance, the massive oak doors looming like the entrance to something final. She could feel the weight of everything, of what had been stolen, of what she had lost. But she wasn't here to grieve. She was here to take it back. The grand hall of the Hughes estate was filled with a hushed murmur, the kind of heavy, uncertain whispering that clung to the air at a funeral. The chandeliers glowed dimly, casting long shadows over the gathering of mourners dressed in muted blacks and greys. The crowd was familiar. Business partners, socialites, family friends who had only ever known Ashley as a name in a headline. They weren't here because they loved her. They were here because they had been invited to mourn someone whose memory they barely carried. And then she walked in. The gasps rippled through the room like a shockwave. A woman's gloved hand flew to her mouth. A man dropped his drink. The murmur of voices rose into something sharper, something panicked. Ashley strode forward, chin high, shoulders squared, every step echoing against the marble floor. Betty was the first to react. She turned slowly, her tear-streaked face paling, as she saw Ashley standing there, alive, whole, unshaken. Her lips parted, but no sound came out, just a choked, stunned silence. Beside her, Dylan's arm tightened protectively around her shoulders, his jaw clenching. Ashley's eyes flicked between them before settling on her father. Thomas Hughes stood by the podium, the speech he had prepared now utterly useless in the face of the impossible. His face, for the first time in Ashley's life, betrayed genuine shock. For a long, heavy moment, no one moved. Then Ashley spoke. "Did I interrupt something?" The room erupted into chaos. The weight of silence returned only when Ashley dropped the first file onto the table. The crisp, clinical medical reports lay open for everyone to see. Harold's signature at the bottom, the list of injuries catalogued in precise, damning detail. The bruises, the lacerations, the marks that couldn't be explained away as an accident. Then, another file. Gerald's written statement, documenting the day he and Ryan had found her, her battered, half-drowned body lying on the shore. Ashley let them read, let them absorb it. She wasn't done. "Dylan," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "You told the press my life jacket came off on its own." Dylan stiffened, his grip on Betty tightening. It did. Ashley reached into her bag and pulled out the last, sharpest dagger she had left to drive into their story. She tossed the printed screenshot onto the table. It was grainy, but unmistakable. A security still from the camera on the yacht, just before she had gone after Betty. Ashley, standing near the railing, wearing a life jacket. Not just any life jacket. A high-end, offshore safety vest designed specifically not to come off unless removed deliberately. The kind Gerald had sold for years, the kind he recognized immediately. Gerald stepped forward, his voice calm but unyielding. "In all my years of selling and repairing marine equipment," he said, his voice echoing through the stunned room, "I can confirm that this type of life jacket cannot be released in a storm. It is made for special tasks at sea, such as offshore fishing, surfing, or high-risk activities." Dylan's expression darkened. "That doesn't mean—" "You would have had to remove it," Gerald continued, cutting him off, "or someone else would have had to remove it for you." The silence that followed was absolute. Betty let out a strangled breath. She turned to Dylan, eyes wild, desperate. "Tell them it's not true." Dylan said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. The moment Donna moved, it was sudden, a sharp, violent crack of her palm against Betty's face. Betty stumbled back, her hand flying to her cheek, eyes wide, glossy with shock. Donna's own hands trembled. Her voice, when it came, was low, raw. "What have you done?" Betty shook her head rapidly, tears slipping down her face. "Mum, don't." Donna's breath hitched. She turned toward Ashley, eyes filled with something Ashley had never seen before. Guilt, pain, realization. Donna took a step forward, then another, and then she fell to her knees. Ashley's breath caught in her chest. "I didn't know," Donna whispered, voice breaking. "Ashley, I swear to you, I didn't know." Ashley stared at her. Donna reached for her hands, but Ashley didn't move. "I let Betty tell me what happened. I believed her." Donna's voice cracked on the last word. "I let them stand beside me. I let them lie." She bowed her head. A mother kneeling at the feet of the daughter she had abandoned. "I was wrong," she whispered, "and I am so sorry." Ashley exhaled, slow, shaking. She had spent so long imagining this moment, wondering if Donna had been complicit or simply blind. Now she had her answer, and she didn't know what to do with it. Not yet. Not tonight. Betty let out a sob, staggering away from Dylan as if realizing finally that he was no longer a safe harbor. Her father still hadn't spoken. Ashley turned toward him, the man who had mourned her death yet never questioned its truth. His eyes met hers, dark, unreadable, and in that moment Ashley realized something. She had never once needed his approval, and she sure as hell didn't need it now. She had won. The silence after Ashley's final revelation felt heavier than any storm she had faced. Dylan and Betty stood frozen, their perfectly crafted lies unraveling before them, exposed under the sharp, unrelenting gaze of the people who had once praised them as heroes. Ashley barely looked at them now. They weren't worth it. Instead, her gaze settled on Thomas Hughes, the man who had built an empire on discipline, control, and an unwavering demand for perfection. He had never been a man of outbursts. His fury was always quiet, contained, and razor-sharp. But in this moment, as he stared at Betty and Dylan, his expression was a mask of pure, seething disappointment. When he finally spoke, his voice was colder than Ashley had ever heard it. "You disgust me!" Betty let out a small, choked sob. "Dad!" "Enough!" His words sliced through the room, silencing her instantly. "You've said enough." His eyes flicked to Dylan, his gaze filled with nothing but disdain. "You were never more than a leech," Thomas said, his voice measured, composed. "But I never expected my daughter to choose you over her own blood." Betty's shoulders curled inward, her hands clutching at the fabric of her black dress, as if it could somehow shield her from the weight of her father's disappointment. Thomas turned toward his lawyer, who had remained still throughout the entire confrontation, expression impassive. "Withdraw their trust funds. Cut them off from the company. I want their names removed from every business agreement, every asset transfer. As of today, they are nothing to the Hughes family." The words landed like a death sentence. Betty gasped, shaking her head violently. No, you can't. I just did." Dylan opened his mouth, his usual arrogance cracking, but one look from Thomas made him snap it shut. For once in his life, he realized he had lost. Ashley watched as Betty staggered back, realizing, too late, that Dylan had nothing left to offer her. He had ruined her, and she had let him. The moment the decision was made, Ashley felt something inside her loosen. She had spent so long feeling trapped, drowning in grief, anger, and betrayal. But now, she breathed, really breathed. For the first time since waking up on the shore of Bar Harbor, she felt free. Gerald, Harold, and Ryan stood beside her, watching the chaos unfold with quiet solidarity. She turned to them, to the people who had given her a home when she had none. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft, but full of something deeper than words. Gerald gave a small nod, as if it had never been a question. Harold crossed his arms, but there was a flicker of something warm in his eyes. "I didn't do much," he muttered. Ryan, still beaming from his small but satisfying role in exposing the truth, puffed out his chest. "You kidding? We took down a whole crime ring." Ashley chuckled. "Not quite." Ryan shrugged, Still, you were awesome. Ashley looked at them again, really looked at them. For the first time, she hesitated. This was supposed to be the part where she left, where she stepped into her old life, reclaimed her place in the world. But suddenly, she wasn't so sure she wanted to. Her father had never fought for her. But Gerald had. Her family had abandoned her. But Harold had stayed. Her sister had tried to kill her. But Ryan had stood beside her, willing to testify even if it meant skipping school. Ashley had spent so long thinking she was fighting for this world, for her rightful place in the Hughes name, but standing here, watching her so-called family fall apart, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she had already found home elsewhere. Ashley sat at the wooden counter in Gerald's shop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The scent of salt and aged wood filled the air, the sound of Ryan rummaging through supplies in the background. She took a deep breath and then began to type. There are moments in life that change you forever. Mine came when I woke up in a small seaside town, saved by a gruff but kind-hearted shop owner and his mischievous grandson. Gerald Callahan and Ryan Callahan didn't just rescue me, they gave me a place to heal. Gerald's shop has been a cornerstone of Bar Harbor for years, weathered, full of stories, and stocked with everything you could ever need for a day at sea. And Ryan, well, let's just say he's the real boss around here. If you ever find yourself in town, stop by, buy something, share a story, and be part of something special. They saved me in ways they'll never fully understand. Maybe it's time the world gave something back to them. She hit post before she could second-guess it. 2 weeks later, the shop was swarming. Customers bustled in and out, filling every corner, examining gear, asking questions, laughing, and buying. Ryan, hair sticking to his forehead, arms piled with life jackets, groaned dramatically. "This is a disaster," he huffed. "I used to have free time. Now, I'm a full-time employee." He turned to Ashley with a mock glare. "Helping you? Was it good luck or a curse? If I say I'm sorry, will you not hit me?" Ashley smirked. "I'd say a blessing." Ryan groaned again, but when no one was looking, he grinned. The sea stretched wide and endless before them, a soft, rolling tide under a sky dusted with stars. The same ocean that had once nearly swallowed Ashley now felt different. Less cruel, more like something whispering a quiet song only she could hear. Bar Harbor had never been part of her plan. It had been a temporary refuge, a place to heal, to remember how to breathe. But now, standing here with the people who had fought for her, stood beside her, laughed with her, she wondered if she had ever truly belonged anywhere else. Ashley didn't go back to Boston. Not fully, at least. She settled the legalities. She spoke with her father one last time, not out of obligation, but because she needed to close the door on that part of her life. Thomas Hughes hadn't tried to stop her when she said she wouldn't be coming back to the estate. He had simply nodded once, cold and detached as always, before asking what she planned to do next. Ashley had hesitated before answering. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I know it won't be here." And that was the last thing she ever said to him. She left, not with anger, but with peace. Back in Bar Harbor, Gerald's shop became a second home. Ashley still woke up most mornings, expecting to feel like she was waiting for something. But that feeling was fading, little by little. Some days, she helped Gerald sort through inventory, running her hands over life vests and nets, like they weren't the same things that had nearly cost her everything. Other days, she sat by the docks, watching the boats come and go, letting the salt air remind her that she was alive. And then, there were the days spent with Harold. It started as something easy, slow, him dropping by the shop for no real reason, her finding excuses to stop by the clinic even when she didn't need anything. She didn't rush it. Neither did he. But the way he looked at her sometimes, like she wasn't just a patient or some broken thing that had washed up on the shore, it made her heart feel steady in a way it hadn't in a long time. One evening, as they walked along the pier, Harold broke the silence first. "You're staying." Ashley glanced at him, surprised by the certainty in his voice. She hesitated. I guess I am. Harold nodded, as if that was exactly the answer he had expected. Ashley sighed, shaking her head with a small smile. Not gonna tell me I'm making a mistake? He smirked. I figured you'd be too stubborn to listen. Ashley laughed, and for once it wasn't a laugh weighed down by something else. Just light, easy, real. The final night of summer found them gathered around a fire on the beach. The flames flickered, casting warm golden light against the cool night air. Gerald sat in his usual worn-out chair, a bottle in hand, watching the fire like it held the answers to something only he understood. Ryan was sprawled out on the sand, pointing at the sky. See that one? He said, nudging Ashley. That's Orion, the hunter. Ashley followed his gaze. The stars stretched wide above them, so different from the skyline of Boston, from the hollow world she had left behind. I never knew much about constellations, she admitted. Ryan grinned. I'll teach you. I know all the good ones. Ashley glanced at Gerald. You raised a little genius. Gerald grunted. I raised a menace. Ryan ignored him. Oh, and see over there? That's Pegasus, and that one... He hesitated, then turned to Harold. What's that one called again? Harold looked up. Cassiopeia. Ryan wrinkled his nose. That's a dumb name. Ashley chuckled, shaking her head. For the first time in years, she felt light, free. The fire crackled, the waves lapping at the shore, the stars endless above them. For so long, the ocean had been a grave, a weight, a reminder of everything that had been taken from her. Now, it was just the sea. Not something to fear, not something that owned her. Just something that would always be there, moving, changing, like her. She exhaled deeply, feeling the past loosen its grip. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't lost. She had chosen this, and for the first time, that was enough. A poor boy was trying to keep